You never know true beauty until you see the Earth from space, or true terror until you hear someone knocking on the space station door from the outside. You look through the porthole and see an astronaut, but all your crew is inside and accounted for. You use the comm to ask who it is, and he says he's Ramirez returning from a repair mission. But Ramirez is sitting right next to you in the command module, and he's just as confused as you are. When you tell the guy this over the radio, he starts banging on the door louder and harder, begging you to let him in, saying he's the real Ramirez. Meanwhile, the Ramirez inside with you is pleading to keep the airlock shut. It really puts life on Earth into perspective. This is from a satire article from Clickhole, but I remember reading this about 8 to 10 years ago somewhere on a website called Imager. For a time, I think this was one of the more popular short horror stories on Reddit, and for good reason. Despite being part of a satire article, the writer has done a good job at both building a scenario very quickly and evoking fear in the reader. It was so good, in fact, that high school me did not even know it came from a comedic article until I did some research for this video. Horror is something I have not often discussed on this channel, but it is a topic I know quite a bit about. I'm one of those weirdos who watches horror movies to laugh at them and occasionally come out of them emotionally traumatized and thinking about what I just witnessed. Horror and comedy are a lot more closely tied than you might initially think, but the essence of horror is not exactly what I would like to cover in this video. Instead, I want to talk about doppelgangers, why they are so useful in the horror genre, and how we can use them to our advantage as writers. The first thing to know about doppelgangers is how they started. A doppelganger has its origins in German folklore as a ghostly apparition with the appearance of a living person. They are omens of bad luck, and it is here we see just how closely tied to human fear a doppelganger is. Doppelganger characters steal the appearance of someone who already exists. Most of the times, they do this in a supernatural or extraterrestrial way, either morphing into someone else, or stealing their skin, or mimicking a part of another character, such as their voice or their memories. But what I don't think is often talked about is how much humans themselves are doppelgangers. Since the dawn of man, humanity has used various techniques to hunt and survive. We work together in packs, we use tools, and sometimes we mimic the calls of other animals to lure them closer to us. In fact, to my knowledge, human beings are the only other creature on Earth who will not only kill you, but skin you and use your skin as a mask to hunt other creatures of the same or similar types. We are the wolves in sheep's clothing, and a hunter who is as intelligent as we are is also a hunter we might fear the most. No other animal understands the utility of fur or skins. No other animal hunts in the same way that human beings do. Human beings are capable of imagining things which do not exist and thinking about things not as they are, but as we want them to be, and then making that imagination into reality. We mimic birds not just in their calls, but also in the way that they can fly. We do this for any animal. We want to breathe underwater, we invent oxygen tanks. We want to travel fast, we invent cars. Even something as innocuous as Velcro is a mimicry of an existing plant. So when we think of a doppelganger or a mimic, we tend to think of something that is malicious, but it doesn't always have to be. Of course, when something wants to wear our skin, that means it is trying to get closer to us in some way. The intentions of the doppelganger are always unknown, but we are more than familiar with their methods, and often we can imagine the gruesome ends for which they use these means. But in addition to being supernatural, doppelgangers can also be a product of our own lived experiences with other human beings. Whether it is someone who tries to mimic your behavior, your clothes, your appearance, or even go as far as to impersonate you, stolen identity is a real thing and something to fear. In our own writing, I think it would be good to draw upon this root of human fear. A good doppelganger character is not just a monster who steals another person's skin to kill them, they are a monster which steals another person's skin for reasons we cannot comprehend nor understand. The ambiguity of a doppelganger's intentions is where a lot of the terror can come from for a doppelganger character. To use the story at the beginning of the video as an example, let's ask ourselves how much we actually know about the monster in that little blurb. We know that it is impersonating an astronaut named Ramirez. We know that it is likely to have come from space. We also know that it can speak our language, so it is intelligent in some degree or another. Beyond that, though, there are also things we know that we do not know, such as which side of the spaceship door the doppelganger resides. We also don't know why this creature is trying to trick the rest of the crew, or if it has already tricked them. In fact, we don't even know if the person telling the story might be a doppelganger themselves. Those are the types of questions which should be left unanswered for as long as your story will allow it, if your objective is to terrify the reader. You see, horror lies not in what we know, but in what we do not know, and doppelgangers are an embodiment of that. The Thing is a movie which preys upon our fear of being impersonated and the fear of the unknown. On top of being incredibly disturbing, the movie manages to evoke a sense of wonder and eerie intimacy. The movie ends rather ambiguously, leaving us all to wonder whether or not the creature was actually killed. It's one of the very few horror movies that doesn't have a sequel, and I honestly respect it so much for that. And yes, I understand it has a prequel, I understand there are remakes, I'm talking about sequels, okay? The majority of 1980s horror, such as Friday the 13th, Evil Dead, Child's Play, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Alien, while classics in their own way, are all movies which ended up spawning numerous forgettable or downright terrible continuations. But despite The Thing being a movie about copying something else, it never spawned its own derivative sequels, which allowed it to keep its ending intact, and thereby cementing it, in my mind, as one of the best horror films from the 1980s. And that's a pretty high bar. Most of the classic horror films we see are from the 1980s. I'm going to repeat this lesson as many times as it takes. The appeal of a doppelganger and the horror genre as a whole is not what you can say to the audience, but the questions which you can leave the audience with. Sure, we might know more about The Thing than we do about whatever doppelganger monster is in the space story from earlier, but when we answer one question in horror, it is important that we do one of two things. Either make the answer unnerving, or make the answer something which puts more questions into our viewers' minds and keeps them guessing. Among Us is a game which does not seem at all related to what I'm talking about. In fact, it seems like I'm talking out of my ass right now, just bringing it up. But hear me out. I know it's been mean to death, but it's a good example. The Thing is that which inspired Among Us, and for good reason. The unique thing about Among Us and why the game is so appealing is that it gives all of us a chance to exercise a very human skill. We get to act and pretend to be something we are not. We get to lead people on and keep them guessing. We also get to interpret that and attempt to solve clues based on the inconsistencies of someone else's behavior. Now, unless you play Among Us like a complete degenerate, with a kill cooldown of 10 seconds, the lights on at the brightest, and as a ghost in a public lobby telling all the other people who killed you, the game of Among Us is a very social and intimate game. It is one of the only games which is going to tell you to get together with your friends and lie to them. As I mentioned before, human beings are some of the greatest mimics and doppelgangers on planet Earth. Figuring out imposters is as much of a skill to us as becoming an imposter is. If you've ever played the game, you likely have memories of times when you managed to fool your friends, or when you manage to uncover the truth and guess correctly. The way I most enjoy playing this game, however, is with the death messages turned off and the lights as dim as possible. I prefer the social deduction aspect of Among Us. The conversations that people have, the accusations, the defense, and the shifting of blame, the misdirection, and the subtle lies or inconsistencies in somebody's behavior and words. I like not having all of the information at my fingertips. I like being made to guess whether or not I made the right call voting someone out until the game ends. If you have never played Among Us like that, I highly recommend you do, because I think it is a much better experience than the typical casual lobbies tend to provide. Get some friends together, look up some rules which lean more towards the social deduction aspects of the game, and observe how people interact with one another. I think you might find some inspiration in strange places. Speaking of inspiration, I have a few doppelganger monsters of my own which I would like to talk about. In the world of my book, there is a distinction between false monsters and true monsters. False monsters are things which are biologically alive. They will have children, they have territories, they have biological behavior and a drive to survive and reproduce. And yet they are still considered dangerous or powerful magical creatures. These are things like hydras or griffins or manticores. The true monsters of my world, however, are neither born nor do they reproduce through biological means. This category of monsters, referred to as mimicry in my world, often use the broken souls of living creatures as a womb to replicate themselves. They're more akin to viruses than they are actual living creatures. These creatures are often intelligent, but they do not speak our language unless it serves the purpose of luring others to their doom or breaking their spirits. One of the many creatures who use mimicry as a method of hunting in my world are the mimicry called oscitor. Without spoiling my book too much, the oscitor are giant creatures who corrupted the light magic created by divine beings to become invisible and create illusions. They are vaguely humanoid with long limbs and bloated bellies. They wear the faces of their victims along their bodies, both as trophies and also as a method of impersonating them. The oscitor can remember and perfectly mimic the voices of their victims. They are not just doppelgangers, but puppeteers, monsters who can recover from any injury and who absorb the magical spells they are attacked with, only to use it against those who try to defend themselves with it. They grow stronger the more they are resisted, and their mimicry becomes almost indistinguishable from the real thing if they live long enough. Eventually, there are only ever vague hints of its true nature, and by the time most people realize it, they've already been snatched up eaten alive, adding to the pile of rotting corpses in their bloated bellies. I know I said before that the ambiguity of monsters is their greatest strength. All the while I have just described to you the lore behind a monster in my world, as well as what it does and how it acts and why it acts that way. But the things I have revealed about them only scratch the surface. They mimic as a method of hunting, yes, but they do not need to eat in order to survive. They kill to perpetuate themselves, but only as a form of reproduction and creating terror within the others who might be watching. The oscitor in my world are never meant to be a true horror monster in the sense that they cannot be overcome. My world is not a true horror story, even if it has horror elements. And I think that is something to consider when you're writing. Just like in Among Us, the horror aspects can play a very different role than their primary function of terrifying viewers. Sometimes it is the monster which gives context to our heroes, and therefore the monster does not need to be ambiguous, but to act as a dark reflection of the protagonists. Because beyond being a horrifying monster, doppelgangers can also represent other themes too. Full Metal Alchemist comes to mind, specifically Envy. This character is a doppelganger outside the realm of horror. They covet the appearances and lives of other people because it is what they lack within themselves. Envy is a dangerously threatening character throughout most of the show, but they are never truly terrifying in the same way that a horror movie monster might be. They are a dark reflection of humanity's vices and sins, and they are one of the stronger obstructing forces for the Elric brothers. But by the end of the show, envy is a sad and pathetic husk of their former selves. Once all of the bravado is literally burned away from their bodies, we soon see the true form of envy as a small, worm-like creature who only ever wanted to have what others possessed. They only ever wanted to be human, and so they mimicked them. And despite how much they pretend to be something they are not, it was never enough to truly make them whole. Because as much as a doppelganger character can terrify us, the purpose of a doppelganger character can also be to serve as a reflection and teach us a lesson. It can make us ponder what makes us who we are. If someone looks the same as us, talks the same as us, and acts the same as us, does that make them us? Often the answer that we come to is no. But oftentimes justifying that answer is difficult. Are we saying that the answer is no because we do not like to entertain the idea that it might be yes? Or is there some aspect to our humanity and who we are as individuals which makes us different even from an identical clone? When I was young, I would often watch YouTubers like Markiplier play video games. I never had any interest in buying nor playing some of the video games he would play myself, but I always did manage to enjoy watching him go through them, especially the horror game. He always managed to entertain me in the best ways possible, and I'm glad to see that he's still doing well despite all of the people who seem to be imposters these days. But one of the games which stuck in my mind from that era of YouTube was a little indie horror title that you might not know. And no, this is not a joking setup to talk about Freddy Fazbear. I'm actually referring to a game called Soma. Soma starts with the main character signing up for an experimental program which scans their brain and translates it into data. It basically recreates a digital copy of a person's mind from that exact point in time. But we don't really know that when we first start the game, or rather we don't fully comprehend it. Instead, what we see is the last thing that this copy of the mind remembers before it starts making new memories inside of a new body. For the first portion of the game, we are led to believe that our character's brain was pretty much taken out of their skull and put into a computer. We are led to believe that the person we play as is the original who has been transferred into a dystopian future by some sort of evil corporation. But as we progress through the game, we slowly come to find that we are not the original. We are just a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And that is no more apparent than the scene where we must switch bodies for the first time. You see, in the real world, as data is transferred from one place to another, that data is almost never the original. We might think we're moving it, but in actuality, all we are doing with that data is erasing it and copying it down into a different location. Our main character hears themselves beyond the other door the moment they switch bodies, fully remembering which body they had previously been in. They now have a doppelganger, or rather, they are the doppelganger, an unwilling doppelganger who had once believed they were the original, the one who was unique and human in every single way, only to be made to realize that they are nothing but the ones and zeros compiled within their hard drives. It is a haunting reality, and one which really made me question what life was about when I was in high school. Who are we as human beings, if not our memories and our actions? What makes us human? Who are we when we strip away ideas of inherent purpose and fate? These are unsettling questions, and I don't blame people for trying to avoid them, but I also think they are necessary to answer in order to lead a meaningful life beyond the illusion of safe thoughts. My personal answer is that our purpose and our identity is that which we decide, and that there is, and never was, such a thing as originality. Who we are is what we experience and how we react to it. Everything is a derivative and an amalgamation of something that came before it. We are the imperfect copies of our parents, and our siblings are imperfect copies of ourselves. We share many similarities with others, but the moment we separate from another body, we become something completely new. we become a new individual. That's not a bad thing, by the way. What we know and experience and who we are is for us to determine, and I think that's empowering. We decide what we want to do. We decide what our purpose is. We decide who we are and who we want to be. In the story of Soma, our character is the mental copy of a person who lived and died without ever knowing the harsh reality of their distant future. That experience and that new memory has been made into a new being in the game. And the longer that being exists, the more they diverge from who they once were to becoming something entirely new. Human beings are capable of going through the same experience and doing the same things, but taking something completely different from it than the next person. We all travel paths which have been walked before, until we inevitably diverge into something that is unique to us and our experience. That is the experience of life, and that is what doppelgangers can teach us sometimes. Once we overcome the fear of mimicry and being impersonated, we can find that our doppelgangers and those who desire to be like us are ultimately envious of us. Human beings can wear the skin of animals to get closer to them, or we can wear it because it helps to keep ourselves warm in the winter. We can mimic the call of other creatures to hunt them and lure them closer to us, or we do it because it impresses our fellow humans to do incredibly realistic bird calls. Because as much as humans might fear doppelgangers on a primal level, one thing we must understand is what I said in the beginning of this video. We are all copying something from someone else or something else to some degree or another. We're all channeling the personalities, thoughts, and opinions of other people we might respect or idealize. And yet, our originality does not come from a place no one has ever been before, but from a bridge someone else has built before us. I would not be able to have this channel if I was not able to put up examples or reference things that have already been made. I would not be able to retell a story or recreate a vibe for other people. If we could not copy other things, I would not be able to mention or put up examples in front of you of shows and stories which do the things that I think they do. In fact, the beginning of this video is a word-for-word copy of the original passage, but that's not really plagiarism, nor is it necessarily copying, is it? Because once I diverged from that initial experience and down a path of winding turns, thoughts, advertisements, I inevitably ended up here. So don't be afraid of lacking original thoughts. Take something that you know and that you enjoy and walk down a path with it. You'll be shocked to find that even a copy of a copy of a copy can turn into something new if you give it enough time, thought, and passion. Take a copy of a document you wrote before, open it up, see what you can change about it, and start writing. Hey, thanks again for watching this video. I want to thank Aura once again for sponsoring this video. Like I said, they are the first sponsor. Please help me have these guys back. I would really love to have a sponsor on every video I make because it helps me make more of this content, and it also helps me make it better for everybody in the future. Thank you everybody so much for the support that's been coming through recently. I am still working to figure out what I want to do with this newfound support and how I want to react to it. So what I do know is that I am grateful for everything that you guys have done for me, all the comments that you leave, and I read every single one of them. I know I'm not going to be able to do that eventually, but you know, for now, I love interacting with everybody. I love this community, and yeah, I hope that this video has inspired you to start writing or continue writing or to come up with some new ideas. And yeah, before I start yapping more, this is a bit off the cuff more than usual. Thank you again, guys, for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!